Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Friday, August 17th, 2018, the day before I don't get to come on the air on Saturday and tell you that it's August 18th, 2018, and talk about how many 18s are in the date. I'm obsessed with that for some reason. Such an easy way to start the show. No telling how I'll start the show today. Of course, a Friday. We are without our, I was going to say usual, but I guess 3 out of the 5 days is frequent, but not necessarily usual. Morning guest, Greg Dworkin, and it just hit the news. Breaking news from Kagro in the Morning World headquarters. Air conditioning installation might end up happening on Monday, which could get in the way of doing the show. We might even have to miss it. Well, though there's still some chance we might be able to schedule it for Tuesday, which would at least mean that we wouldn't have to do without Greg. We could get the Monday fix in, but we'll see what happens. I'll update you. You'll probably find out Monday morning. There's no telling when we'll actually know about this stuff or what channels I might be able to use to let you know about it, but there it is. There's our first channel to let you know about it. Right here on this channel, Netroots Radio. It's going to tell you first. All right. Many things to catch up on, and only some of which are actually relevant to the future of the country. Big story, I guess, this morning, chatter-wise anyway. Yesterday we found out that, thank God, we finally listened to the calls from the right and other conservatives to put a businessman, a real live businessman in the White House to do great deals and find a way to save the taxpayers' money. His big parade, which up until yesterday, I guess, he was insisting was just absolutely finally going to happen in November, somewhere, I think they were planning it for Veterans Day, which makes a certain amount of sense if you think a parade makes any sense at all. And, this was the one that he got jealous of the Bastille Day parade in France and decided he had to have a military parade. Just like, either that one or North Korea's military parade or the old Soviet military parades. And he decided he was going to have this thing planned. And it was going to be easy. It's so easy to do. You just order the military to do it. And a victim, once again, of his own why don't you just-ism, he said, we're going to have a parade. I don't know whether where the first estimates of the cost came from. I'm sure he had no idea. But I think when they originally announced the thing, they thought they could do it for a relatively low budget, $12 million, which is way too much to be spending on anything that doesn't, do anything at all for anybody except him. And he's got $12 million. Let him pay for it. And it turned out yesterday he was $80 million under budget in terms of his planning. And of course, I say under budget. That is to say he misbudgeted by $80 million. It would come in $80 million over budget. It was going to cost $92 million to put this thing on. And it was going to be timed for November, like a month or two at most, depending on the timing. Well, let's see, November, we know when Veterans Day is. So let's say about a month and a couple of days over any government shutdown he was threatening. Remember, he was saying he's already threatening, going to shut down the government unless there's money for my wall, which Mexico was supposed to pay for, in the budget. And if it's not there, I'm shutting the government down. A month later, he was going to blow $100 million on a parade for himself. That wasn't going to look too good. I don't know who was going to care, but it certainly wasn't going to look good. But anyway, I guess this morning he's been teased out of it. He now says it's everybody else's fault that it was going to cost too much. He's blaming the D.C. government. They're overcharging us for, I don't know what, security, I'm sure, is what he's going to blame it on. But again, another of the problems of why don't you just-ism is you have no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea what the costs of anything are. And you make a plan like this and you're just going to end up looking stupid. So instead, he's canceling the parade to show us a thing or two. And I think he says he's now going to go to France, fly back to France for another parade. There will be the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day. it being 2018. That puts us 100 years from November 11th, 1918. So good opportunity for a big parade there in France. They were very happy about the end of the war there. We were all happy about the end of the war, but particularly in France because it was happening there as opposed to over there. They were, a little closer to the action. So big parade planned for France. He'll go over there. And instead of spending $100 million on a parade here for no particular reason, he will spend probably a good $30 to $40 million going over there to watch somebody else's parade. So a terrific result obtains. So here we are, Daily Kos Radio, once again, live now. And Bill, as always, with a morning tweet. Lately, we haven't remembered to get to sharing that tweet. There's been so much to gab about in the morning, and well, no different here. Daily Kos Radio is live now, picking up the slack for Trump's canceled military parade, the one we just talked about. Kagro X, that's me, hi, broadcasts while driving his riding lawnmower through his neighbor's marigolds for 2 hours. And why not? It's clearly, it's about as good and about as meaningful to everyone else as this parade would likely have been. Okay, it's just very, what can you do? It's just, he's a lunatic, and we have to be rid of him. The sooner the better. That's the bottom line. Okay, well, let's see. There's awful things happening on all fronts, but perhaps we'll pick things up with this Friday. A brief survey of bits and pieces of news that we've put away. I'm trying to consider whether or not I think it would be worth going back and reading through and discussing the balance of Matthew Iglesias' article that we didn't get to yesterday about Elizabeth Warren's plan to save capitalism. My guess is, well, I don't know. We'll see where the discussion leads us, I suppose. I'm guessing that, that having been, the first half of it having been discussed and the link having been disseminated, perhaps those interested have already had a chance to dive in. I don't know. We'll see. Take our brief tour of Pocket and see what presents itself. I spend the off-the-air time collecting these stories and thinking what a great idea it would be to talk about them, and then it doesn't always strike me the same way when Showtime rolls around. But let's take a look at some of the things that got dropped in there yesterday. Omarosa still releasing tapes. I guess doing a masterful job at stringing the story out. I don't know. What was it that she released yesterday at 1 o'clock? Is this the one? This must be it. The New York Times has a report. I love the fact that she had scheduled a press release and was teasing everybody with it. 1 o'clock, I'm going to release something. Must have been this one. Omarosa Manigault Newman releases tape of Lara Trump's $15,000 a month job offer. And we heard about that from Omarosa. She said that she was basically offered a $15,000 a month job to keep her quiet. They fired her from the White House, but will get you essentially the same amount of money you were making in the White House if you'll agree to, I guess, abide by the non-disclosure agreements. More about that in the news, too. And just keep your faith with Trump. And I guess it was not to be. Maggie Haberman, I wonder if she was happy or infuriated about being assigned to this task. I think probably happy because, for the most part, as inconsequential as the whole sideshow is and is likely to be even in the prosecution, if it ever happens, of Donald Trump and the rest of his operation, I don't know how much this adds to things, but evidence is good. But Maggie Haberman and Ken Vogel got put on this piece, and I don't know. I assume everybody's chatting about it in the Hamptons, maybe, so I guess it's a good thing. Let's see. So her latest tape was the backup for her claim that she had been offered $15,000 a month to shut up. The audio released during an interview on MSNBC is the latest in the trickle of recordings that Ms. Manigault Newman, because it's the New York Times, has made public to bolster the credibility and sales, probably, of her Tell Some book. I like that rather than a Tell All book. Unhinged, about her tenure at the White House, which reads funny because it makes it sound like she was unhinged, and she probably was, but she means him. In the book, she claimed that the Trump 2020 campaign, which is partly overseen by Lara Trump, I guess everything that is done by a Trump is partly done that way. Lara is married to Eric Trump, of course, because the other son isn't married anymore. So you can't make that mistake. Anyway, he or she, Lara, because she's married to the son, so why not run the campaign for re-election for the president of the United States, offered her a salary equal to what she had earned before being fired from the White House in December. And that brings its own problems, which I think maybe are addressed in this piece. If not, we'll discuss them a little bit. Ms. Trump noted on the tape, and that's interesting, which Ms. Manigault, I guess everybody gets a Ms. these days, which Ms. Manigault Newman said was recorded days after she was fired, that the money would come from campaign donors. And I think maybe it's beginning to upset campaign donors that this is happening. All the money that we raise and that pays salaries is directly from donors, small dollar donors for the most part, Ms. Trump said. It's interesting that she even felt like she needed to throw that in there. I think that was I think she actually was doing that to try and make Omarosa somehow feel better about the prospect of taking the money, which is interesting. But I think the thinking might be, well, small dollar donors are, of course, by definition, not big dollar donors, and big dollar donors are the ones that we all think of as being tainted in some way. Small dollars are somehow really totally awesome because, I don't know, they don't come with a list of demands, I guess, is the thinking is sub rosa, I guess, thinking on small dollars. I don't know whether that makes any difference to Omarosa, but anyway, small dollar donors for the most part, Ms. Trump said. So I know you were making $179 at the White House, and I think we can work something out where we keep you right along those lines, which is, I mean, as a business deal, I guess it makes a certain amount of sense. In a statement, Ms. Trump said, this is the part that makes it interesting to me. Ms. Trump said that she had shared a bond with Ms. Manigault Newman during the 2016 campaign, quote, as a friend and a campaign sister, and I am absolutely shocked and saddened by her betrayal and violation on a deeply personal level. I hope it's all worth it for you, Omarosa, because some things you just can't put a price on, she continued. Now, lots of people, of course, pointed out Lara had just put a price on it, $15,000 a month for you to continue to pretend to be a campaign sister and a friend and yada, yada. This, it should be a lesson to the Trumps, but it really isn't. And also, I think they actually know this lesson already. Nobody is friends with the Trumps. They just want to get paid by the Trumps. Rich, poor, doesn't matter. If they treat the Trumps well, because they're horrible people, they deserve to be banished from the face of the earth. If they're horrible people and you treat them like delightful people, it's because you are looking to get paid by them. And I don't know, Lara Trump, I don't know how you missed this message. I mean, you just married Eric Trump. I don't know, not just married, but you married Eric Trump. I mean, quite honestly, the prospect of liking somebody or pretending to like somebody a lot better because of their money cannot really be surprising to you, even if you are fully and honestly in it for love. It clearly must have occurred to you that it might have occurred to him that you might be interested in him because of his money. And if it were not true, you would probably be conscious of it and working hard to make sure that you never gave that impression, if you're a normal person. I doubt that you are, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt on this one and say, maybe if we're willing to say, if you are a normal person, you might have been doing this. So you're not going to fool anybody by pretending to be surprised by betrayal. And I guess secondly, I was just sort of interested in the idea of well, one, how quickly she throws around $179,000 because she's a Trump. Now, she's married into it. I don't know whether she came from money, but I love this whole thing where, you're my sister here. We really are deeply, bonded. We're friends, etc. And, I mean, as a business deal, I don't know how else you pitch it. We can keep you where you are, money-wise, and maybe that would keep you quiet. But, as a friend, as a campaign sister, like, why not a raise? It's just sort of interesting that the way that Lara Trump feels like she should deal with sisters and friends, if she wants continued sisterhood and friendship from them, is, well, what's the minimum I can do here money-wise? And money's my only weapon. What can I do to keep you friendly and sisterly? And the answer is, I will come back with an offer that's about the same as we were doling out to you before. And I understand I guess you don't want to waste campaign money. I don't think you really care one way or the other. But outwardly, you don't want to look like you're wasting campaign money. But why not a little bonus? Why not a little more? I just thought that was interesting. And you're making $179. I think we can work something out where we keep you right along those lines. In other words, I think we can find a way to keep that leash on you and keep you at heel. Friend, sister. I'm not suggesting that it would have been any better or more honest or more human to try and bribe her with $20,000 a month, although that might have worked. And just, pointing out the dynamics among these people. You're my friend. You're my sister. I really trust you. It's such a heartbreak to see you leave, and so much so that I don't want you to leave. I want you to stick around and help us out the next time. Yeah, really? You value my input? We really do. Okay, well, I'm not rich like you. I need a salary. Well, we could probably fix it so that, you got whatever you were getting. Okay, because I thought, like, you really valued me, like, really highly and stuff. And, $179 is great, but anybody who's making $179,000 will always tell you they wish they were making, well, wouldn't I rather make 180, 190, 200? $1 million, of course, but maybe that's not practical. But it's just sort of interesting to see that dynamic at work. Anyway, moving on here. The tapes of Ms. Manigault Newman's private conversation with Mr. Trump and other officials connected to him have rattled the White House in a way, the few things other than the special counsel investigation into possible campaign collusion with Russia have. Mr. Trump's aides have been concerned that they will make appearances on other tapes, of which Ms. Manigault Newman is believed to have as many as, and this was the big deal last night, 200. Everyone wondering what could be on all 200 of these tapes. Her willingness to slowly deploy the tapes for maximum effect is straight from Mr. Trump's playbook, which includes, the playbook that is, not the tapes, but which includes boasts of relying on truthful hyperbole, you remember that one, to engage people. Also, of threatening to expose people with recordings and of claiming to have scurrilous information about people that he might reveal at any moment. Very much his playbook. Believe me, Ms. Manigault Newman said on MSNBC, invoking one of Mr. Trump's favorite phrases. 2 words, and one of them is me. Anyway, invoking one of his favorite phrases to convey his sincerity. My tapes are much better than theirs. Aha. Ms. Manigault Newman is not the only person who has caused Mr. Trump harm with his own tactics. There is, of course, Michael Cohen, the president's former personal lawyer who told allies he did not want to be made the scapegoat for Mr. Trump's legal troubles. Mr. Cohen secretly recorded a conversation in which he and Mr. Trump discussed payments from the National Enquirer's parent company to a Playboy model who had claimed she had an affair with Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump's campaign said it had no knowledge of the payments, but the recording was made before those denials. Michael Avenatti, who represents Stephanie Clifford, that's Stormy Daniels, has also used the president's own tactics to rattle him. Mr. Avenatti has waited for Mr. Trump to make denials and then dribbled out contradictory information. He's been omnipresent on cable news, just as Mr. Trump was in 2016. On Thursday, that would be yesterday, I guess, right? Officials at Simon & Schuster, the publisher of Unhinged, said they had received a legal warning letter against publication from Charles Harder, the libel lawyer whom Mr. Trump has retained in other matters. The publisher's lawyer responded in kind, saying the president was using the highest platform in the land to censor someone, which he is. and which creates a unique set of problems, really, for him in pursuing his proposed libel claims, I guess. And, just one of those things where, again, I guess, why don't you justice him? Trump, now president of the United States, allegedly just says, why don't you just use the same tactics that have always worked? And the answer is your situation has changed. You're now using the power of the presidency to impose a prior restraint on publication. That's actually a much more serious implication than a private citizen saying, I will sue you for libel and we'll take our chances in court. Some major donors, here we are, the information about whether or not they were upset about using their small dollars to pay Omarosa. Some major donors, who aren't small donors, to Mr. Trump are bothered by the revelations that the campaign may have used a slush fund, or really using the campaign as a slush fund, to pay fired or troublesome employees, said Dan K. Eberhardt, an Arizona donor and energy executive who serves as an advisor to the America First Policies group created to support Mr. Trump's agenda. It's diverting donor money that could be used to wage the midterm election battle or store resources for Trump's re-election, Mr. Eberhardt said. Instead, it's an elongated hush payment. And that is true. The rest of it is not true, however, or at least questionable. I don't think that a great deal of the money for America First Policies, which I guess is one of the outside super PACs, first of all, they shouldn't be, if it's a super PAC, they shouldn't be coordinating at all. That would be problematic. And two, if it was a super PAC, I don't know how much money they could or would want to spend on the midterm elections, though they could certainly do issue advertising that would benefit Republican candidates everywhere, presumably. If they had any issues that would benefit a Republican candidate, they could opt to talk about that using that money. And it is interesting, once again, that Lara offered up small dollar donor money for Omarosa. Like I said, I guess in an effort to make her feel better about taking the payment, but, as opposed to saying, we can arrange for one of Mr. Trump's rich friends to pay you $15,000 a month. Well, no, that feels dirty. But we can arrange to skim $15,000 a month out of the small dollar donors. Well, that's okay because, one, they're small people, and lots of them, and I don't have to feel guilty about taking that money. But so you might wonder also, for instance, why do we care whether a major donor like Dan Eberhardt is upset about having Omarosa get paid out of this fund? After all, Lara said it was coming from the small dollar donors, and the answer is all money is fungible. We've been over that, and there's no telling once you take the money out of the pot whether it was the dollars sent in by small dollar donors or the dollars sent in by large dollar donors. He has every right, I suppose, to believe that the money is coming out of his pocket, or the money that once came out of his pocket that now is in the Trump campaign's pocket is being used to pay this hush money. It is, as a legal matter. Anyway, unless, of course, he's been donating to the super PAC, which is probably not paying her, although, they may be setting it up that way. It's not clear who or which entity would be handing over the $15,000 a month, and certainly lots of troubling or annoying employees who didn't work out in the White House have ended up on the payroll of various groups, including the super PACs. Like Katrina Pearson, I think, landed there. They couldn't find a job. There's no job dumb enough to give her at the White House. It really didn't make the cut. So they parked her at one of the super PACs. And I don't know whether that was the proposal for Omarosa or what. Anyway, big deal. Who cares? It's diverting donor money that could have been used to wage the midterm election, right? Maybe, kind of. Or store resources for Mr. Trump's election. That it certainly could have done. Instead, it's an elongated hush payment. He added, though, that he did not believe it would dissuade donors. They still want to win elections. And, of course, curry favor with Trump. And that's still an option available to them, no matter who ends up with the money in their pocket. So, an interesting look at that. And what we'll do next after the break, since we're bumping up against it here, is take a look at one of the elements of the story, the non-disclosure agreements, because they're in trouble too. Everyone always thought that they might, in fact, be unenforceable for a number of reasons. One being it's not entirely clear that the executive branch of the United States government is entitled to non-disclosure from the people who staff it, at least not above and beyond the discussion of any classified information they might come across while in the employment of the government. And two, because and this will shock you. Number two will shock you. Well, number two usually shocks a lot of people, depending on how it's presented. If I just put it on a plate and stick it in front of you, that's pretty shocking, I must admit. So we'll do that with this. It will shock you to find out that the president's lawyers totally suck. Now, we'll go into some of the details about how badly they suck and why we say that they suck so badly. But we can wait for that after the break. But like I said, it should not surprise you to find out at one level or another that there was something wrong. Was it big, small, complete and total? Wrong with the president's campaign and White House non-disclosure agreements. So we'll get to that. And lots of long reads parked out there as well, and maybe we can share one of those for a Friday. That's always a nice way to pass the time. Another nice way to pass the time is with this fantastic music that reminds us that we are going to take a 2-minute break. Not because of anything dire or super important that needs to be done. I need to breathe a little bit. Oxygen is lacking here at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters. When you do a show solo, it goes out. I should get an oxygen tank. We need to do a big fundraiser for an oxygen tank and mask so that I can breathe easy during the break. I'll be right back, and we'll tell you again just how bad his lawyers suck. What a treat after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's get started with rounding up whatever else we can cram into today's show. Just by way of following up on the question of how bad are the president's lawyers, Yahoo News has this piece, a jointly bylined piece from Hunter Walker, who you may know from Twitter. And, all right, I need a drum roll sound effect. How do you think this one is pronounced? It's the first name here is Luppe. And it's not like Lupe necessarily, as it might be in Spanish. But, I mean, is that an equivalent? Should it be pronounced that way? Lupe? Lupin. Am I wrong? Lupin? You tell me. That can't possibly be it. Great name. And apparently the actual working name of the person you may know on Twitter as NYC, New York City Southpaw, with that cute dog avatar and everything, very active Twitter personality, whose real name would likely, if it were mine, drive me to operate under a pseudonym instead. It's just fun to look at because it's like Boutros Ghali. It's the same word over again, but with an N on the end. Lupin. Good luck getting me to pronounce that one correctly, I guess. All right. If anybody has any idea, they can tell me. Otherwise, I'll just say, it's Hunter Walker, who's, I guess, Hunter W, right, on Twitter. I think that's his handle. And we'll just say NYC Southpaw. Teaming up for Yahoo News, Judge, not just any judge, but the judge in this case. Judge says Trump campaign screwed up on wording of confidentiality agreements. How exciting. Well, This in the case of one Jessica Denson, pictured in the piece with her publicity photo, which, it's a very surprising story, and, I'll let them tell it because they know what they're doing. A Manhattan judge issued a ruling on Thursday that thwarted the Trump campaign's attempts to keep a lawsuit out of open court, with potential implications for the looming battle over fired Trump aide Omarosa Manigault-Newman's slow-motion revelations of her experiences in the Trump campaign and White House. You can see now how we are moving in progression here. First the Omarosa story, then this one. The decision came in a lawsuit filed by Jessica Denson, a former campaign staffer who filed a complaint last November that alleged she was subjected to harassment and sexual discrimination while she worked on Trump's White House bid in 2016. And you might note, if you were following along with the story or you had seen it, or picked up on the clue, that it was her own publicity photo that was used to illustrate the Yahoo News article. You might have guessed, for instance, what sort of person has their own publicity photo. It is either a high-powered CEO or an actor or actress type person. And I don't know whether she has any acting background, but it seems likely. I don't know if it's discussed in the piece at all, that perhaps she had some sort of modeling background. And lo and behold, for whatever reason, she thought the Trump campaign would particularly value her work and might be interested in having her do that work, maybe because she was a model, maybe not. However, the allegations that she makes certainly seem to suggest that, yes, they were interested in for precisely that reason. So here we are. Jessica Denson, who looks, fantastic in her publicity photo, found mysteriously that she was harassed and sexually discriminated against while on board at the Trump campaign. Lawyers for the Trump campaign tried to force the case into private arbitration based on an agreement signed by staffers that included non-disclosure and non-disparagement provisions. And so there was a mandatory arbitration provision in there as well that would prevent plaintiffs and potential plaintiffs from getting into open court and making accusations that would be embarrassing to the campaign. Although what would be embarrassing to this campaign, I have no idea. I guess, though, somehow this still embarrassed them. In her decision, Judge Arlene Bluth of New York State Supreme Court, and just a reminder, in New York, the State Supreme Court is not the highest level appellate court in the state or anything like that. Supreme Court is sometimes confusing to people. That happens to be the style which they gave to, in fact, the lowest, the trial courts. It's supreme in the sense that it has general jurisdiction. And I don't know really why they chose Supreme for that one. And I guess their top court is actually called the Court of Appeals. I don't know if they have it. I guess they must have intermediate courts in New York. But at any rate, the Supreme Court isn't what it sounds like. But Judge Arlene Bluth of that Supreme Court that isn't what it sounds like disclosed flaws in the wording of the agreement that she said limited its scope. The ruling exposes potential weaknesses in the non-disparagement and non-disclosure agreements that staff at Trump's White House, his campaign, and the Trump Organization have been made to sign. These documents have made headlines this past week as Manigault-Newman, a former White House staffer, claimed the White House was trying to use them to silence her after she went public with a tell-all book and a series of embarrassing tapes from her time in the West Wing and from working on Trump's campaign. Denson is suing the Trump campaign in state court for $25 million, alleging she was subjected to severe and pervasive slander, aggravated harassment, attempted theft, cyberbullying, and sexual discrimination and harassment by her former supervisor, and now you get a name, Camilo Sandoval, and other campaign staffers after she received a promotion to, quote, mobilize the campaign's Hispanic engagement effort in September of 2016. I don't know whether she is of Hispanic origin. Could be. Denson doesn't tell us much of anything about her entire background, but the name alone wouldn't necessarily suggest it, but could be the case. Anyway, I assume they did that for a reason, and that the reason was that she claimed some Hispanic connection or heritage. At any rate, I am sure so did Camilo Sandoval, and I guess that's how he ended up her boss. The Trump campaign and Sandoval, who is, by the way, currently, here's how he was punished for the allegations. He's the acting chief information officer for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Well, anyway, from that position, he did not respond to requests for comment on this story. Too busy covering for the 3 Trump cronies that run the department from Pervalago. But according to Denson's complaint, which was filed in November of 2017, the harassment included being routinely overworked, the mysterious disappearance of her laptop charger, that does not seem like a huge deal, but okay, being treated in a demeaning and abusive matter. That's interesting. I think she probably meant manner, and we'll get to how that happened in just a minute. And being subjected to a conversation with Sandoval where he laid down on a couch in front of her in a physical, sexual posture. Okay, well, it's not a Harvey Weinstein level issue, but okay, it's certainly could be pretty clearly could be taken as sexual harassment. I don't really know. I have no guess as to what that posture was, but I'd rather not have it described or have to view it myself either. The Trump campaign attorneys responded a month later by filing a request for arbitration with the American Arbitration Association. That's a great name for an association of American arbitrators. And demanding damages of $1.5 million because Denson published certain confidential information and disparaging statements in connection with a lawsuit that she filed against claimant in New York Supreme Court, i.e. this one right here. And if I recall correctly, their non-disclosure, non-disparagement agreement probably includes a $1.5 million in liquidated damages clause that basically states if you violate this, we will be seeking that amount of money in, well, probably not in court, but in arbitration. So, okay, so here's what happens. They sign the thing. It's supposed to keep you quiet. It threatens you with a $1.5 million penalty if you break it. And it says, by the way, if you were to file a suit about your employment, we will seek to enforce the forced arbitration clause and remove the case from the public courts and have them refer it to arbitration instead. And that's exactly what they're trying to do here. So far, so good. Things are going more or less as the people who wrote the NDA think they should be going. Now we run into problems when the judge gets to decide, will I agree with your motion to remove this case and put it in arbitration? On March 19th, lawyers for the campaign from the firm of LaRocca, Hornick, Rosen, Greenberg, and Blaha, I didn't know that there were any Blaha people at that firm, moved to take the case out of court and have it heard in private arbitration. In the motion, the Trump campaign lawyers argued Denson was bound to private arbitration because before joining the president's White House bid, she signed a written employment agreement in which she expressly agreed to arbitrate any dispute arising under or relating to her employment. Well, for a non-lawyer, or most non-lawyers anyway, or somebody making a quick perusal of the agreement, they might say, they have a point here. Any dispute arising under or relating to her employment. However, that's a problem. Arbitration, though, they pause to explain, is an alternative to trial, a hearing before arbitrators, who are often retired judges, in which the records may be sealed from the public. The parties involved also have some ability to decide who will hear the case, unlike the random assignment process typical of the courts. In other words, it's a parallel system outside of the public court system whereby the two parties to an agreement can agree in advance that, or sometimes usually one party is coerced into agreeing, you can't have this service or you can't make use of this product unless you agree, quote unquote, agree to settle all cases in arbitration. But once the two parties agree to do that, it's legally binding, even though it's not actually handled by a court, by agreement, by unanimous consent. In other words, the two parties agree to pretend that this arbitrator's decision is just like a judge's decision and it should be legally binding. Well, to give you the closest parallel, perhaps, hey, Bill, you'll understand this one, right? If you appear on Judge Judy's show, right, and Judge Judy finds against your claim and or orders you to pay money, you could just say, I'm not doing it. You're a TV judge. This isn't a real courtroom. We all dressed up as if it's a courtroom, but it isn't one. You're wearing those robes so that everyone will think you're a judge because that's the name of the show. But other than that, be gone. You have no power here. And she really doesn't, unless the two parties sign a legally binding agreement to pretend that they will listen to her and pretend that she is a judge. And if she rules against you and you don't pay, then the contract under which you agreed to abide by her ruling is enforceable in a court of law later somewhere else. And you end up in court, but only on the question of whether or not that person really owes you money, based on the decision against them. You don't have to relitigate the case. You can simply point to, 1, the existence of a valid arbitration agreement, and 2, the decision of the arbitrator. And that is enough for the courts. The courts agreed to say this is a real contract, and in exchange for keeping this mess out of their hair for the most part. So anyway, that's how you get to that and how you end up in arbitration. If you go to the People's Court or Judge Judy or any of the other TV judges, it's because you've signed an agreement that says we agree to pretend for people's entertainment on television that our serious legal matters are being settled by a real judge in a real court of the United States, even though it is happening in a television studio with fake stuff, making it look like a real courtroom. They could make it look like anything they want. They choose a courtroom so that people will enjoy the television drama of it all. But yeah, they could have used the set from Sesame Street, Big Bird's Nest. It would have been just the same. It doesn't matter where it takes place, so long as the two parties agree to have it there. And I think I have a real show here. I should go pitching it. A Sesame Street arbitration by Muppets. It would be fantastic. What could be better than having your case settled by Muppet judges? It'd be amazing. I think I can sell this. Anyway, the motion for the Trump campaign's attorneys included a copy of the agreement Denson signed, that's important as evidence, which was similar to documents that have reportedly been signed by White House staffers. Now, the meat of the stuff here. Why is this such an important, or how did they screw this up? Bluth's ruling noted flaws in the agreement Denson was required to sign. The judge suggested the document was worded badly and implied it could have done what the campaign's attorneys wanted if it had been written better. Check this out. As an initial matter, the court observes that the arbitration clause confines arbitration to, quote, any dispute arising under or relating to this agreement, Bluth wrote, adding, with emphasis, it does not require arbitration for any dispute between the parties, or even any dispute arising out of plaintiff's employment. You catch a subtle difference there? In other words, you have to go to arbitration if there's any dispute under or relating to this agreement. The agreement says, I won't say anything bad about you, and I won't disclose any confidential information that I came by as a result of my employment, but and I agreed to go to arbitration. So if any of that was being disputed, that could perhaps be covered by the NDA. But the claim here is by the Trump lawyers that any dispute you might possibly have with the campaign must come under arbitration, even though the agreement says, no. Any dispute arising under or relating to this agreement, this piece of paper and what's in it. And that's not at issue here. She's suing them about sexual harassment. That's not covered in the agreement. They made a huge mistake. And it's a simple thing. And if they had simply said, as she points out, if the document had said, you will go to arbitration should any dispute arise out of your employment with us, that would have been enough. It's a very easy thing to do. And you can absolutely rope people into this. It's a question whether you can do it for a public position. But in the campaign, it could absolutely have been binding if they had just worded it correctly. And I think they took it off boilerplate language from other agreements where the contract is more comprehensive in what it addresses and makes clear the scope of the entirety of the scope of the agreement inside the paper that's being signed. But that's just not the case here. It doesn't describe any of the job descriptions. It doesn't describe the job duties. It doesn't describe the conditions. A more comprehensive contract might, and I think they just borrowed language from a more comprehensive contract, whether it was one of theirs or from an outside source or whatever. They copied this language that says any dispute arising under or relating to this agreement. And it's a very narrow and limited agreement if you look at the paper. So she really got him on that one, I think. Bluth even took aim at the title of the document prepared by the Trump campaign. In the motion to compel arbitration, the campaign's attorneys described the document signed by Denson as an employment agreement, but the judge noted this wasn't actually written down. The agreement simply titled Agreement and did not say it was an employment agreement. I think probably everyone was supposed to understand that it was an employment agreement, but it doesn't say so, and that's kind of a problem. I don't know how big that problem is, as long as what's described inside the agreement is pretty clearly the conditions of employment. I think it would be okay to understand it as an employment agreement, even if it didn't say so in the title. But the other problem is a bigger one. Any dispute you have with the terms of this agreement have to be arbitrated. But any other dispute that you might have with us, well, that's just not covered because we're dumb and we didn't really draft this thing. We stole it from something else. The end. I don't know whether all judges would feel that way, but that's a fine argument. So there's simply no way, she says, to construe this arbitration clause in this agreement to prevent pursuing harassment claims in court. The arbitration clause could have been written to require that any dispute arising out of employment go to arbitration, but it did not. It just didn't say that. Bluth's ruling became public today, that would be yesterday, when Denson tweeted a copy of the order. Now, here's the really interesting thing. You might say, wow, who is the brilliant lawyer who noticed this and beat the Trump campaign at their own game, the Trump organization at its own NDA game? And the answer is she did it herself. It is notable, the authors say, because Denson is representing herself and still defeated the Trump campaign's lawyers. That's amazing. The judge's decision represents a rare victory for a pro se litigant, the legal term for a person proceeding in court on their own behalf against a party represented by licensed attorneys. Denson, a young actress, there's the answer, declined to comment on this story. She's not a lawyer, but she plays one in real life. How do you like that? In an ironic twist, this is a little interesting here too. President Trump was personally a party to the New York case that establishes the legal principle controlling Bluth's decision. That 1993 case, Trump versus Refco Properties Incorporated, concerned a dispute among the partners who own the Grand Hyatt near Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan. It established that a party may not be forced into arbitration unless their agreement to arbitrate expressly and unequivocally encompasses the subject matter of the particular dispute. President Trump sought to avoid private arbitration. In that case, he wasn't president then, but Donald Trump sought to avoid private arbitration in that 1993 case, and he won the issue on appeal. Bluth specifically cited that decision in her ruling against Trump's campaign. The dispute between Denson and the Trump campaign now spans several different public and private forums. In addition to the action Denson brought in 2017 in New York State Supreme Court, I remember what that means. She filed a complaint in federal court seeking to have the entire non-disclosure agreement declared null and unenforceable. The Trump campaign's attorneys may stand a better chance, actually, of prevailing in the motion to compel arbitration filed in conjunction with the federal court case because Denson's complaint is more likely to be viewed as arising under or relating to the agreement than Denson's harassment claims in state court. Do we all get that? Her claim in federal court is, I don't know why she asked the federal court to do it, but she did. Asked the federal court to throw out the entire NDA as unenforceable. And there, I mean, at least with the respect to the arbitration part, the claim that disputing the propriety of moving whatever part of this federal case there is left to arbitration instead would be covered by the NDA because that's one of the explicitly stated terms of the agreement, and it's not hard at all to make that one work. Whereas there's nothing in the agreement about, well, we either get to sexually harass you, or if someone does sexually harass you, you have to take it to arbitration. Again, it could say that. It could just say anything that happens with respect to your employment is now subject to arbitration. But it didn't because they stole boilerplate language from somebody else who wrote it with a very different intent. They just figured, I don't know, it's legalese and it sounds very general, so it must be as broadly as we could put it. This is probably the best and most adaptive language. Instead, it was the worst and least adaptive. These questions may bear, if indirectly, on the attempt by Trump's lawyers to silence Omarosa. That issue has mostly been discussed as a First Amendment matter in which a citizen's right to criticize the president is at stake. But Denson's dispute hasn't reached the level of constitutional rights, at least not yet. It's being litigated so far on the wording of the forms crafted by Trump's lawyers. Bluth, who also ruled to allow Denson to amend her complaint, repeatedly described her decision as being put simply. It is clear that the limited agreement is not applicable to the current dispute, the judge wrote, and that's the end. That's actually, well, I guess that's all she wrote on that one. And interesting, nuanced, a little bit of a legal lesson there for everybody, including the attorneys involved in the case. Hope that cleared things up for you. Makes for good weekend chatter, I think. Bruce McFarland helping us out here with the research or knowledge, perhaps off the top of the head. The interwebs, yes, it is research. The interwebs say that the mid-level courts in New York are the appellate division of the Supreme Court. Yes, okay, great. That makes, it makes sense once you accept that they did something weird and named their lowest court the Supreme Court. You get it? Let's see. Oh, look at this. What's your last name here? Crescitelli. Hi, D. How are you? D. Crescitelli has this to say: I would totally watch arbitration by Muppet judges. Excellent. Thank you for endorsing our idea. Good explanation of the basic arbitration process this morning. So it's been worth it, and everybody has learned something. Well, not everybody. Some of you probably already knew this. Others of you may have caught up with the arbitration deal. If you ever wondered about that, how do you make people agree to go to a pretend judge? Or if you ever flipped by, the People's Court. Why do people do this? Well, they do it, whatever. Maybe you figured for the payday, they get paid an appearance fee on the show, or they just want to be on TV or whatever. But people actually go to fake judges all the time without television cameras. It costs less than going to court, generally speaking. You want to avoid it if you can. You tend to lose a lot in arbitration. By the way, do you know why that is the case? I mean, one of the running theories, I don't know that it's provable because, of course, each arbitrator is different, and a lot of them are ex-judges, and the whole idea is that they'll be as fair as judges, so supposed to have no fear of going to arbitration rather than going to court. So the caseloads are typically lighter, and the procedure is a little bit more streamlined because you can change the rules. You don't have to legislate new rules for the court, for one thing, and you can streamline procedure and lower caseload and everything. So things move faster, so there are lower costs. Your attorneys can represent you there, but presumably they rack up fewer billable hours because they're not dealing with court bureaucracy on top of everything else. They end up dealing with the arbitrator's bureaucracy. But, I guess one of the big problems that is alleged anyway about arbitration is, of course, if you are a big corporation or for some reason, for whatever it may be, you are a repeat player in arbitration. These are private institutions, and the judges do get paid. They get paid by the arbitration company, essentially. You form like anything else, you form a company and you staff it up and you hire ex-judges to be your arbitrators and people to, fill in the role of clerk and the other administrative positions, etc. And you got to pay to use their system. And if you're a repeat player and you're basically, if you're the biggest customer going in this arbitration company's docket, if you account for some significant portion of their revenue, in other words, how do you think they will find in close calls as between you and all of the clients that you are suing in arbitration before them? You see the temptation? That's one of the big problems. In addition to, of course, getting to, having different rules, but so different from a courtroom, strictly speaking, a public courtroom's rules, slightly different. And the repeat players there, most lawyers will be able to figure out the procedure pretty quickly, and it doesn't differ that much in arbitration. It's supposed to sort of mimic a courtroom's way. But, if you get to know the judges, get to know the procedures, because you're a repeat player there, you'll have an institutional advantage, not to mention, like I said, the fact that it will be well recognized at some point, somewhere along the line, by these professional retired judges. I see this guy all the time. This guy, I know how this stuff works. He's paying my salary. I think I might fine for him in any close decisions. That's one of the problems. It's just out there. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. And by the way, this is a good point. Mighty OCD letting us know what was going on during the break. Is everyone clear on this? During the breaks, if you're listening on the live stream, I have no idea what you're hearing. I had some input eventually on what you were hearing when we started to run our pitches for both our Patreon account, which I encourage everyone to be a part of, and also encouraging everyone to be a part of the show by sending in your taped submissions that we can include in the show. That we've been able to ask Justice to plug in, but really, I guess essentially the issue is that I don't really care what gets played during the break. It's available for any sort of use, but it's basically that's where other than the pre-taped pitches for contributions via Patreon or your taped submissions, that's just Justice being Justice, filling those gaps with his own selection. So if you, for instance, enjoy the music that gets played during the breaks, Justice is your source for what the hell is that music, or where can I find something much like it? And that's his creativity showing through there. And a couple of times people have asked me, what is that song that you play? And I say, I don't know. I don't hear any song. On my end, I just hear that music I play every time I go out on a break. This one, this whole thing, that just plays for the full 2 minutes or 1 minute or whatever. That's all I hear. I don't get to enjoy the music. It comes out the other end. Essentially the way the show works, mechanically speaking. I am piping out whatever the hell I'm doing here. It goes to Justice, and he turns around and sends the same thing on forward without touching it until the break, at which point he plays something different. So isn't that interesting? We've all learned a little something there. So when Mighty OCD says, no, you sing the silly French songs to your cat during the break, and gave me he's always got great wacko gifts to share with everybody. And I always enjoyed this one in particular. A funny cat video. I love funny cat videos. And but the music, I don't get to hear it until somebody asks what it is, and then I ask Justice, and he sends me a copy, and I say, interesting. So just a little, it's a way, you're hearing Justice's brilliance shining through silently on his part anyway. He's letting the silly French music do the talking for him, and I guess he knows a lot of silly French songs, and they're all pretty good. Every time I every time someone brings it up and I hear one, I always say, oh, I wish I had that one. That is awesome. I like it. And he'd give it to me if I asked. But I'll let it be a little treat between you and him. Okay, let's see. Where to go next? I think we're done with arbitration. Although if you'd like to force everything else into arbitration, we are available for that. So good job to our article authors, Hunter and Lupe. And great job, fantastic job to pro se plaintiff Jessica Denson, the actress with the publicity photo who beat the Trump lawyers because they're dumb and lazy. Well done. Great story there. All right. Let's see. Other things that we should, let's see. What are we going to do? Let's all decide together here. We have a piece from the New Republic that when a young Trump went to Russia, but I think we've largely heard bits and pieces of the story about that, but it's an interesting one and not a short one. A long read thing, maybe you'd be interested in it. It's written by Craig Unger, who has written one of the definitive pieces of that we've shared a long time ago. I can't recall. Maybe it was him. Did he write the Trump laundromat piece? But he's really been deep into the Trump-Russia connections for a long time and viewing the historical record on that stuff. We have, of course, the second half of the Elizabeth Warren plan to save capitalism, which I think we got the gist of yesterday. Anyway, a couple other interesting things, though, to share with everybody, and maybe we ought to run through a couple of them. Let's see. I think, you know what? Maybe we'll occupy our time, being that we have about an hour left, with something we teased earlier in the week and that Armando thought would be a good idea to share. Remember, we spoke about it earlier this week. We hinted at it at the end of last week. It's Friday again. Maybe now's the time. Saudi Arabia, back in our scope here. Saudi Arabia starts to weaponize its wealth. Remember when I teased that one? This is a Bloomberg opinion piece. Lionel Laurent, the author. And it brings us back to that problem that we have raised. Oh, yes. You know what? This is a great subject. Problem we raised, and we haven't taken the time to rant about this in defense of our Canadian friends. I'm sorry we're late to the fight, Canada. You were right all along. Saudi Arabia starts to weaponize its wealth. The subheader here, Canada dispute, shows the risk of selling stakes in Western assets to Riyadh. That would be, of course, in Saudi Arabia, selling the capital of Saudi. Okay, and I like how we refer to them, selling assets to Riyadh. Are we selling assets to Riyadh? Riyadh's the capital city. That implies that the Saudi Arabian government and the Saudi Arabian government's sovereign wealth fund is the one doing the purchasing, and that they're a real country with a real government and everything, as opposed to what's really happening here. It's a little bit like arbitration. They're saying, look, for the sake of dealing with us and having names that you can put in a contract which will guarantee that you'll send us a bunch of money, we're willing to pretend we have a governmental structure here. That's what the international community is asking of us. But what we have is a person who owns all of this land. It is, as we say, Saudish Arabia. It is owned by Mr. Saud, and there are several Mr. Saud. And by way of imposing a governmental structure on what is essentially a large estate, compiled by conquest, nonetheless, but it's still a large estate, we will style the landlord king, and then you will all understand that this is a sovereign nation and government as opposed to one big landowner that we're dealing with here. And I mean, you know, it's not unusual. It's not like that's so weird and exotic. That's the way Europe was run for hundreds of years, thousands of years, really, and we still have that. But, you know, we've imposed other Western governmental trappings to sort of move away from the fact that, well, some of the most developed Western nations with which we have normal governmental relations are, in fact, still grand duchies and principalities. But, you know, we gave them a name and a flag, and, the nominal rulers have ceded an awful lot of their power constitutionally to others. Not the case in Saudi Arabia. But we just say, well, gosh, they're sticking by that primitive kingdom structure that the rest of the West moved away from a long time ago, but for whatever reason, for eccentricities or quaintness, they have decided to stick with the monarchy model instead. So anyway, saying that you're selling stakes in Western assets to Riyadh perpetuates that. You're selling stakes in Western assets to the Saud family, and they are holding them in the name of that thing, their estate, which they call Saudi Arabia. Could easily have been Rashidi Arabia had the war gone the other way, but it didn't. Just want to remind everybody, and we really should. Nobody's really going to abide by this except you and me when we do this on Twitter. But yeah, it would be helpful, I think, in understanding the autocracy there if we were to refer to Saudish Arabia as, Mr. Saud's estate. That's how he runs it. Now we understand his autocracy. He owns the place. Anyway, now let's get on to the story here and wonder about the dangers of weaponization of this individual wealth that's disguised as sovereign wealth, and figure out what the hell they've done to Canada and how we've let them get away with it. Here's a subject that Elon Musk might think twice before tweeting about. Resource-rich Saudi Arabia, which in recent months amassed a $2 billion stake in the Twitter-mad billionaire's electric car company, Tesla, has declared economic war on Canada. The cause was a tweet by Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland, whose call for the release of social activists arrested by the Gulf monarchy, arrested by Mr. Saud and the security forces on his estate, essentially. Now, could you do that? No, because you're not a sovereign. Even if you owned Mar-a-Lago, let's say. If somebody trespassed on Mar-a-Lago, you could apprehend somebody. You could try to effect a citizen's arrest if you would want to try that. But if you wanted that person arrested, you'd still need to call the official, honest-to-God, actual police there in Palm Beach, and they'd have to effect the arrest subject to, pursuant to their delegated powers. But Mr. Saud can have his private forces do it, one, because it's a different governmental system, and two, because that governmental system is whatever he says, because he owns the land, and the borders of his estate are recognized for whatever reason by the rest of the world as international borders, because it makes it more convenient. We can send money and they can send oil a lot easier. Although really, honestly, if it was just recognized as a private landholding, you'd think that would be more simpler. I don't know. But I guess the powers that be back in the day when this whole thing was set up thought it was more legit looking if we pretended it was a government than a country. Anyway, so Chrystia Freeland's call for the release of social activists arrested in Mr. Saud's on Mr. Saud's compound in the Middle East earned a stunningly disproportionate response this week. Let's get to that one. Look at this big chart that's in my way here. Let's move on. Musk should have reason to care. He's half Canadian. I guess that's enough. And studied in Canada. He had built his cash-guzzling automaker north of the international boundary, or had he, rather, built it north of the international boundary. The Sauds, in other words, would doubtless have taken a different view on that backing for Tesla and the possibility of helping him take the company private again. What does this really have to do with anything? All right. Indeed, it's this apparent Saudi willingness to weaponize its overseas investments that should give Western governments and business leaders pause for thought everywhere, and might explain in part why Canada's allies have been slow to offer backing to Freeland and her Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. We've seen this style of economic warfare before. In the 1970s, Arab states wielded the oil weapon, but this latest attack comes after a dramatic increase in Riyadh's foreign investments. This is sort of a slow way of getting around to the story. Do they actually describe what happened in the fight here? No, I don't think so. And perhaps we need that as backgrounder before we continue. But if by some chance you haven't heard about the fight between Canada and Mr. Saud and his PR firm, the Saudi Arabian government, let's see if we can find. I must have a piece here somewhere. Plus, I've got some discussion of it from Twitter that will help sum things up. But let me borrow from Laura Clausen's organization of the issue on the front page of Daily Kos last Tuesday, I think. Yes, the 7th, not this Tuesday, but the prior Tuesday. The U.S. won't speak up for human rights. Can you believe it? As Saudi Arabia retaliates against Canada's tweet. Okay, so what was the tweet? Basically, it was pretty routine. The foreign minister of Canada found out that Mr. Saud had, among the thousands of other people and potential opposition leaders that he has arrested some human rights advocates. And I think they were even, they might have been women's rights advocates either as well, or I'll let Laura describe what kind of advocates they really were. But basically, suffice to say, they were looking for basic human rights recognition on the Saud compound and didn't get it, and irritated the landowner, Mr. Saud, enough that he used his private police force to arrest them. And the Canadians rightly said, because they actually have a system of government, I mean, it was the foreign minister who said it, but she was speaking for Canada, the country, the sovereign nation, because that's the way their system of government works, when they said, hey, you shouldn't just arrest people for asking for rights. That's silly. We think you should let them go. And the Saudi Arabian government responded, we're going to 9/11 you. Basically, that's exactly what they did. Let's start with Laura's background here. Saudi Arabia, I'll say, she says Saudi, is lashing out at Canada after Canada tweeted its support for human rights. And the Trump administration says it doesn't want to take sides because, of course, they licked Trump's ass when he went there. Now, it's amazing to have a king lick your ass. It's probably great to have anybody do that. But granted, they were putting on a show. But, you know, for him, he just cares about the superficial. They gave him shiny objects. They let him wave a sword around. They actually put a red carpet down. They played trumpets wherever he walked anyplace. And he loves that stuff, loves it. So he's super pro-Saudish. So now he doesn't want to take sides, which in this case boils down to taking Saudi Arabia's side. Canada had the nerve to call on Saudi Arabia to release 2 human rights activists who are currently political prisoners. Maybe we'll just make the swap here for Mr. Saud's response, essentially, to that was to eject Canada's ambassador. And by the way, talk about your ego trips here, right? You have a state so large that other countries actually pretend it's a country and send ambassadors, and you just throw them out. He ejected the Canadian ambassador, withdrew his own ambassador, I'll put that in quotes, from Canada, canceled future investments in Canada, and that's a problem for Canadians, suspend flights to Canada, and pull out thousands of students studying in Canada on government scholarships. So if you were going to school, to college in Canada to, study whatever the hell it is you might want to study abroad, if you're a Saudi student, or you're a serf on Mr. Saud's estate, or maybe you're a member of the royal family and you're studying abroad, you can no longer go to college in Canada. How do you like that for disruption of your life? So clearly, Mr. Saud is willing to go to the mat for his right, as he sees it, to imprison human rights activists who happen to trespass on his land, while Canada is sticking to its stance that imprisoning human rights activists is bad. The Trump administration, on the other hand, had this to say: we are aware of the quote-unquote government of Saudi Arabia's statement recalling the Saudi ambassador to Canada, expelling Canada's ambassador. A State Department official wrote in an email Monday afternoon, Canada and Saudi Arabia are both close allies of the United States. I refer you to the Canadian and Saudi Ministries of Foreign Affairs for further information. Saudi Arabia is not, in fact, a treaty ally of the U.S., though Canada, a member of NATO, actually is. The reporters at Huffington Post helpfully point out in the excerpt that Laura has chosen here. According to Amnesty International, it is now time for other governments to join Canada in increasing the pressure on Saudi Arabia to release all prisoners of conscience immediately and unconditionally and end the crackdown on freedom of expression in the, they say, country. That is not the Trump way, and by refusing to condemn the imprisonment of activists, the State Department has asked the government of Saudi Arabia for additional information on the detention of several activists. The administration is letting autocratic governments around the world know that as long as they suck up to Trump enough, he won't hold them accountable in even the most tepid ways. So that's the basics of what's happening here. As for the specifics of what happened, I am going to have to scroll back for a ways to get to. I think discussed this past weekend, so it'll take me some time to find it. There we are. What was amazing here is, okay, so first there's the tweet from the foreign minister saying, hey, you really shouldn't imprison human rights activists there on your land, Mr. Saud, although she didn't address it to him specifically. Remember, we're pretending that the Saudish compound is a country, and so we address Saudi Arabia, which, is not supposed to be meant personally addressed to Crown Prince, he's the S, not the Z, right? MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, right? It's not a personal insult to him, but of course, remember, he is the owner of the land there and considers himself the government, and so guess what? He took it personally, and I suppose somebody, an overzealous intern on the compound there, decided that a proper response to this, and maybe I'll bring up the Boing Boing coverage of it that I found interesting, and I used their report and their screen grab of the tweet here, but essentially the Saudi, a pro-government Saudi Twitter account. I don't know what that actually is or what that's supposed to mean, and talk about blurring the lines even further as between who's really responsible here and what is this entity with which we're dealing, Saudi Arabia. A pro-government Saudi Twitter account posted a visual meme, I guess you might say, to respond to the Canadian foreign minister's call for freeing the activists. And it is a photo of, what is this? Which skyline is this? Is this Toronto skyline? I don't recognize the skylines in Canadian cities. Or Ottawa, perhaps, because it's the capital, or I don't know. I mean, at any rate, I'm sure it's iconic, and I have no idea because I don't know the skylines of any place. And I don't think I would recognize on anything but perhaps the skyline of New York City, Washington, D.C., I guess, if you can call that a skyline. So sorry for that one, Canada. But here's the deal. It is a picture of a Air Canada jet. I don't know whether they photoshopped this thing together or it's an actual shot, but, it could conceivably, if you knew the layout of the city, you might be able to tell me whether it is or isn't a jet on approach to an actual routine landing there. But instead, what it looks like is the nose diving, not quite, but of the Air Canada jet into one of it's the big radio tower in the skyline here. In other words, the tallest building in the skyline being targeted by a jet aircraft. And the tweet meme reads, "Sticking one's nose where it doesn't belong!" ! As the Arabic saying goes, he who interferes with what doesn't concern him finds what doesn't please him. That's an awkward way of saying things, but basically, you stick your nose in our business, i.e. imprisoning people that we don't like on Mr. Saud's land because they ask for human rights, we'll get you a 9/11, Canada. And I thought, wow, and probably you did too. Wow, that seems like maybe they overdid it on the response here. But thinking about it the way I was describing it last weekend, think about the gall that this takes to do something like this. Well, not only, of course, to reference 9/11 and threaten Canada with a 9/11, but to do so as Saudi Arabia, which, after all, at bottom, was the home base, the nationality, if you believe in that, of 15 out of the 19 9/11 hijackers. Nobody forgot this. We were just instructed to overlook the fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi. And though we never forgot it, we never really got hotted up about it either, because we were just kind of told by our government, well, sure, that's the country they came from, but that's not what the Saudi Arabian government wasn't behind it, and they don't support this sort of thing, even though we later found out maybe they do, and maybe they were funding it, and maybe members of the royal family have been sending the money for a long time on the sly. And after all, Osama bin Laden perhaps maintains more ties to Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabian money and Saudi Arabian royal money at that than should be considered fair or comfortable, let's say. And we secreted all of Osama's family, allegedly, right? Extended family members out of the country post 9/11, but lots of Saudi officials were exiting the country and making a dash for it immediately post 9/11. Imagine our having gone out of the way to not let our most rabid anti-Arab, anti-Muslim lunatics rant and rave and threaten with respect to Saudi citizens who might be here in the United States. Imagine our calling off those dogs post 9/11 and having it rewarded with the belief in Saudi Arabia that a fair weapon of international relations for them is to threaten more 9/11s, especially against our neighbor. I say closest ally. We used to be our closest ally. Now, of course, they're not, because we pushed them away because Trump is an idiot. But anyway, imagine thinking that the proper way of viewing the American forbearance with respect to Saudis post 9/11 was the proper response is to threaten more 9/11s. They had to wait a while. It's true. But to go and do that, I mean, that's pretty amazing. And as I said in the tweet, imagine the gall that it takes after the willingness of the world, really, not just Americans, the world to separate Saudi Arabia itself from the deeds of these most notorious 15 citizens, the 15 of the 19 9/11 hijackers. And now you have to imagine the treason and treachery that it evidences for Trump to shrug in the face of the threat of a literal threat of another 9/11 against Canada. Imagine another American president, any American president you want in history, getting away with saying, oh, somebody threatened Canada with a 9/11? If it happens, it happens. I don't want to take sides. There are fine people on both sides of 9/11, is what he's basically saying here. On the other hand, I would probably say, maybe they need to reevaluate things over there in Saudi Arabia. What does it do for Saudi Arabia? As I said, who Trump's legions have somehow been persuaded to accept as some kind of exception to their blanket fear and hatred of all Muslims as terrorists. It's okay that Mr. Trump has his picture taken all the time with rich Arabs. That's fine because they're different. They're the ruling class of Saudi Arabia. And it's not all Saudis is essentially what they're saying about this. What does it do for Saudi Arabia as a fake nation to go around threatening 9/11s? I mean, I don't know what they thought was going to come of it. As it happens, they're immune from an American response. But what about among the public, the unofficial response to the idea that the Saudis now feel emboldened to threaten 9/11s, and Trump, the I'm going to fight terrorism and why don't we just ban everybody guy, is okay with it and, mugs for the camera holding the sword in, sword dancing with the Saudis when he visits there. I find that rather amazing. And of course, rather amazing that to look back that, yes, Saudi Arabia, home of 15 of the 19 hijackers, somehow miraculously excluded from his idiotic travel ban right from the beginning. What do you suppose was behind that? Okay. Very weird. And now we're up to date on what the exchange was about and the nature of the exchange. And by the way, you shouldn't lose sight of the nature of the exchange for the Trump administration here either. Abandoning your allies for money is straight up treason, the kind they put you in the electric chair for, although I guess we don't use the electric chair anymore. That's all there is to it. Saying that I'd rather do personal deals than stand up for a actual NATO ally? Yeah, treason, sorry. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And by the way, just to clear things up before exiting from this section of the story, it was the skyline of Toronto. It is the CN Tower that the airliner is aimed at. And the tweet came from, the Infographic KSA account. That's how it's described, and so I guess that when they said a pro-government, in other words, they're employees of the government, paid for by Mr. Saud and his family, and I don't know what Infographic KSA is about Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So essentially, I don't know, it might even be too weak to say it's a pro-government Saudi Twitter account. It's a government Twitter account. So, and the government isn't the government, it's the family, so they're the ones doing it at the end. Anyway, just clearing that up, and moving on then to the weaponization stage of the story. Somewhat disjointed view of things here. I see why. It's because, once again, I am defaulted to and stuck with, let's see if I can change views here, the AMP view of things, and it's really getting on my nerves. I try never to share the AMP versions with you in the daily roundups. I find their display unnerving and difficult to navigate. So where were we? We had told you that it was Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland who tweeted quite ordinarily in favor of the release of the human rights activists, and they sent that ridiculous response. Now, it then escalated to a diplomatic war when the Canadian ambassador was expelled and the Saudi ambassador recalled, and everybody was kicked out of Canada. They stopped investing in Canadian deals and made everybody leave Canadian universities, etc. Riyadh, as we said, has halted new investments in Ottawa, expelled Canada's ambassador, stopped the state airline flying there, suspended a student exchange program, pulled medical patients from Canadian hospitals. This is how much control they have there because it's a private compound there. They can do that. Now, a government would ordinarily, I guess, have the ability to do that sort of thing, but they might have, if they were a Western democracy, perhaps due process to proceed through, but not the case in the autocratic kingdom. What else did they do here? Started selling off Canadian assets, according to the Financial Times. It's out to punish the Canadians no matter the cost, a source close to the situation told the Financial Times. Elon Musk, should have reason to care. There we are. He's half Canadian, studied in Canada. Had he built his cash-guzzling automaker north of the international boundary, the Saudis would doubtless take a different view on that backing for Tesla and the possibility of helping him take the company private again. Indeed, it's this apparent Saudi willingness to weaponize its overseas investments that should give Western governments and business leaders pause for thought everywhere. hearkening back to their style of economic warfare, the oil embargo from the 70s. The Public Investment Fund, Saudi Arabia's wealth fund, that is to say, Mr. Saud's money, owns stakes in Uber Technologies, German transport firm Hapag-Lloyd AG, Richard Branson's Virgin Group, and they love virgins over there. I'll take 72 shares of your Virgin Group, Mr. Branson. An infrastructure partnership with Blackstone Group, and the biggest ever technology investment vehicle with SoftBank Group Corporation. SoftBank, that's a name that's come up before. Jared Kushner was trying to borrow from them, or did borrow from them at some point, did he not? Turning Saudi's state investment arm into a $2 trillion powerhouse is core to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's strategy of diversifying the economy away from oil. That is to say, he's not diversifying the economy, he's diversifying his portfolio. They don't have an economy, he simply has personal holdings. Anyway, few have seen fit to turn down this money, yet we've already witnessed the collateral business damage the Saudis can inflict if another country displeases them. In September, a Riyadh-led economic blockade of Qatar forced the country's wealth fund to sell shares in far-flung companies like Tiffany & Company and Credit Suisse Group to prop up its domestic economy, which isn't a domestic economy. The latest geopolitical spat is small in terms of absolute economic impact. Canada-Saudi trade is tiny, and Saudi doesn't own many assets in the country, but it shouldn't be dismissed lightly. Canada's Western allies want to encourage MBS because they believe he offers the best chance of bringing the kingdom into the rich country mainstream. Yet, there's a risk in handling too much economic leverage to a government that's clearly ready to use it to halt even the most anodyne criticism of its human rights situation. As Donald Trump's trade rhetoric shows, we're moving into an era where these bilateral fights are becoming the norm. Those Saudi billions may come in handy, just ask Musk, but there are serious conditions attached, and that's because it's a personal billions that are being invested there. And we just head back to that last paragraph there. Canada's Western allies want to encourage MBS because they believe he offers the best chance of bringing the kingdom into the rich country mainstream. In other words, to further the development of a more Western-style government, if not necessarily democracy. In other words, to continue the charade and to make further, decorate with further trappings of democracy, I guess, or Western-style government, the personal land holdings there in the Arabian Peninsula. But, there could be no clearer sign of their unwillingness to really follow through on that than to withdraw every investment of every kind made in Canada in response to something so stupid. And it wasn't stupid. It's so routine, really. Western governments are going to call for the release of prisoners of conscience. They don't often even mean it. They're just going to continue to do it. That you would take offense at it shows really, honestly, you're just not ready for prime time. You're not ready to pretend you're a real government. You're not ready to take over the fake government that you have in that country, and you are not a dependable ally in the project of modernizing and mainstreaming Saudi Arabia. It's just not going to happen. You're an autocrat. That's the way it is. You want it to stay that way. You would like, I think his big project, MBS's big project, is to make this, his compound there in the Arabian desert look more like a country, operate more like a country, put on more trappings to fool more people into thinking it's a real country and not just a personal, compound that just happens to be really big and have missiles and tanks. But that's what's going on there, and we really shouldn't lose sight of it. We don't need to exclude them from everything in the world necessarily. We just need to understand what's going on over there and deal with it appropriately. It's not like really a country. It's not the case. And, they would like it to be the case, and it's probably insulting to them to say that it isn't the case, but that's because their project is to make us think that it is one. They don't want to run the place like one. They just want us to think they're running the place like one so that we will leave them alone to do as they please. And it's insulting to them because they're finding out that we're seeing through it. And, what can you do? I mean, you're just either going to have to do better or really reform, or we'll just say, we know what's going on there. It's okay. It's not okay. We don't like it. We shouldn't allow them to continue to do these things. But, what are we going to do? Invade them? That's the style chosen for themselves. It's the style they have to live with because Mr. Saud has a humongous security force, and we sold most of their weapons to them, and that's unusual. And, you won't find us, for instance, selling, ground to air, surface to air missiles to Bill Gates to defend his estate. Although, maybe under the Trump system, we would do that. Why not? It's money for the government, right? But normally we don't allow that sort of thing to happen. But because his estate is huge and he says he's the king, that means he's a government. So we're going to let him do these things. It's a good reminder of what's going on there. All right. Let's see. Some other items that probably deserve some attention, including one item that deserves, or I guess will get no more attention. Karen begs us not to do the rest of the piece on how to save capitalism, and I don't know whether that's because, we already got the idea, or they're not very good ideas, or I don't want to save capitalism. That's a legit pushback too. But yeah, I think we got the gist of those things. I was just sort of interested in, was there more to it? And with her running for president, it would probably pay for all of us to have a better idea of what her proposed policies are. But that's actually not in keeping with my own philosophy of the approach to upcoming elections anyway. Quite honestly, I try not to pay a great deal of attention to the white papers and position papers that get put out there, though they're interesting to discuss, perhaps, and debate the finer points of. I wouldn't worry too much. It doesn't really tell us what will happen in an Elizabeth Warren presidency. It just tells us, okay, well, this is where her mind is, and that's okay. And it's good to know, generally speaking, where she's coming from. But yeah, I mean, aside from the general gist of it, maybe it would just be time wasted other than to say, yes, she's interested in seeing corporate governance be handled a different way. And that's probably not even as radical as she's willing to get. It's just what she thinks she can get American nervous Nellies to swallow. And that's fine, incrementalism. And although maybe that's what's irritating Karen. I don't know. But anyway, we'll skip that one for now. And you can certainly review it on your own. I was just sort of interested in the fact that there was now going to be, as probably part of a presidential campaign platform, some discussion of shifting from shareholder supremacy back to a more equitable interest in a broader array of stakeholders. And that's something we've talked about on the show, and I'd be glad to see that be adopted as an approach for a presidential candidate. All right, let's see. Other discussions or articles worth bringing up here. Oh, here's a weird little snippet. I guess we can kind of stick to shorter bits and pieces here. Don't think I brought this one up, but this is just sort of good gossip news, which is what Axios is all about. Jonathan Swan had a bit here back on August 5th, and we never mentioned it. The TiVo presidency. Trump relives Trump. Insightful in a way. I mean, you guessed that this was happening, but it's good to see it on the record. Like an NFL coach reviewing game film, President Trump likes to watch replays of his debate and rally performances. But instead of looking for weaknesses in technique or for places to improve, why would Trump do that, right? Trump luxuriates in the moments he believes are evidence of his brilliance. Trump commentates as he watches, according to sources who've sat with him and viewed replays on his TiVo, which is preloaded. He didn't actually tape them himself. Put these things on my TiVo so I can watch them. Preloaded with his favorites on the large TV in the private dining room adjoining the Oval Office. When watching replays, Trump will interject commentary, reveling in his most controversial lines. Wait for it. See what I did there? See what I did there? Amazing. Those are quotes. That's what he'll say. It's what it says right in the... I didn't make that up. It actually says that. People think it's easy. What's that about? Trump said in one riff about rally footage, per a source with direct knowledge. I've been doing this for a long time now, and people are used to it. Every rally. It's like people have said P.T. Barnum. People have said that before. And they think that's easy because, hey, P.T. Barnum, he does the circus. They don't realize it's a lot of work. It's not easy. He thinks he's slaving away here. In the early weeks of the administration, Trump loved to relive his debate performances against Hillary Clinton. His favorite, according to sources with direct knowledge, was the St. Louis debate after the Access Hollywood tape leaked, when the Trump team invited Bill Clinton's sexual misconduct accusers as their guests in the live audience. He didn't do anything. He just had people sit there. Trump used to enjoy rewatching the moment in the debate where Clinton observed, "It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country." Because, Trump replied, "You'd be in jail." And, of course, he is in charge, and she's not in jail. Isn't that funny? And I guess that faded away as a favorite moment. A source who's discussed the moment with Trump told me he thinks it's the greatest thing that ever happened in the history of presidential debates. Just wanted to let you know what was on the president's mind and how it operated. Thought you might find that at least somewhat insightful. All right, let's see. Do we have enough time for a bunch of other things here? I don't know what else we can kind of shoehorn in here, but maybe I'll give you a taste of this. We'll never fit this thing in here. And I think I once tried to read this, and this too was like a long form piece that took an hour and a half to read through. But I want to give you a taste of Dexter Filkins' piece from April of 2018, something I was thinking of using as a follow-up of the last Friday pre-recorded show where we talked about the Donald Trump New World Order and the personalities of the Middle East who were, shaking things up / pulling things down there in the Saudi Peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula. A Saudi prince's quest to remake the Middle East. Kind of a profile, and maybe a little bit of a puffy profile on MBS. But I thought in the New Yorker, Dexter Filkins put this thing together. My recollection was that it was part, continuation of the fluff that we hear about. Oh, he's looking to reform. He's a big reformer. He's going to be great for the future of Saudi Arabia. But also a pretty hard look at how he operated the place as a personal, fiefdom, if that's the pronunciation you prefer, and his weird relationship both with MBZ and Jared Kushner and others. In his work with the White House, is Mohammed bin Salman driving out extremism, as his supporters claim, or merely seizing power for himself? And the answer could be both, obviously, but you just, if you're seizing power for yourself, then you're replacing the Islamic extremism with a personal extremism, an autocratic extremism. Let's get at least a taste of what's going on here. A few days after Donald Trump was inaugurated, Jared Kushner sat down to decide how to reshape the Middle East. Jared, I want you to reshape the Middle East. During the campaign, Trump had promised a sweeping transformation of the region. How could he do so? Well, he was probably assured by people who were ready to kill all their rivals that they would take over and transform the region. Steve Bannon, that's not in there. I added that. This back to the article. Steve Bannon, Trump's senior aide and ideologist at the time, told me recently our plan was to annihilate the physical caliphate of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Not attrition, annihilation, and roll back the Persians and force the Gulf states to stop funding radical Islam. That's the quote. It doesn't have anything to do with what's actually going on there or what MBS thought he was doing there or what Jared Kushner thinks is possible there. But that's what Steve Bannon wanted to rail about. Rah, 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 rah. Caliphate, Persians. The Middle East Initiative, Bannon said, was one of the few points of agreement in an otherwise fractious White House. I don't think so. Jared and I were at war on a number of other topics, but not this. Well, you're gone and he's still there, so I think you were at war. Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, was put in charge of policy for the region for no reason. He was Jewish, so maybe that'll work. Okay. He had no experience in diplomacy or in Middle Eastern politics. At age 36, he had spent his working life managing New York and New Jersey real estate projects and running the New York Observer, a fading tabloid. But a former senior defense official who worked with Kushner told me that he had been educating himself on the fly. He's not a scholar on this stuff, the official said. His knowledge is gained from talking to movers and shakers in that part of the world. You can read a lot of books, but you never get the type of education you get from talking to the Kissingers and Petraeuses of the world. Well, I don't know. Well, you know what we think of the Kissingers and Petraeuses of the world. I thought the movers and shakers were the king and crown prince, but okay. In a conference room, maybe that's telling. In a conference room at the White House, Kushner met with aides from the National Security Council. We took out the map and assessed the situation, the former defense official said. Surveying the region, they concluded that the northern tier of the Middle East had been lost to Iran. In Lebanon, Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy, controlled the government. In Syria, Iran had helped save President Bashar al-Assad from military disaster and was now bolstering his political future. In Iraq, the government, nominally pro-American, was under the sway of Tehran. We kind of set those to the side. The officials told me they're lost. We thought, so what then? Or rather, so then what? Our anchors were Israel and Saudi Arabia. We can't be successful in the Gulf without Saudi Arabia. And that is to say, Mr. Saud. That meant reversing the approach supported by Barack Obama, who, unlike previous presidents, had kept the Saudis at arm's length, objecting to their repressive internal policies, their treatment of women, and their aggressive posture toward Iran. Obama, in effect, hoped to create a kind of balance between Riyadh and Tehran. In March 2016, he told the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg that the unsteady condition of the Middle East requires us to say to our friends, as well as to the Iranians, that they need to find an effective way to share the neighborhood and institute some sort of cold peace. Trump and Kushner wanted no such détente. Everything we could do to strengthen our relationship with the Saudis, we're going to do, the former defense official told me. Above all, that meant forming a new alliance with Saudi Arabia's deputy crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, known in the White House and throughout the Middle East as MBS. Bin Salman, though only 31, was already one of the most powerful people in the kingdom. The son of the current monarch, he was the Minister of Defense, chairman of the committee that charted the kingdom's economy, and second in line to the throne. In a country long ruled by aging kings, MBS was young, tall, and transparently ambitious. He wanted to wean the kingdom from its unstable addiction to oil and to diversify its economy. He promised to end the long-standing arrangement of Saudi domestic politics in which the royal family and its myriad princes bought off political opposition by allowing radical Islamists to propagate their creed and even to carry out terrorist acts abroad. And I guess that's what made him attractive to people. They heard, oh, he's not in favor of continuing the funding of terrorism. That's a good thing. And it is a good thing. But it tends to make us overlook other things. And also, good idea to diversify and wean the kingdom from its unsustainable addiction to oil. Except remember, it's, the kingdom, it's his estate. He wants to make his money elsewhere rather than in oil. And that's kind of a good thing. But it's not really diversifying an economy. It's hedging in his own personal investment strategy, and that's kind of a different thing. But okay, he doesn't want to fund radical Islamists. That's a good thing. MBS was uncompromising in foreign policy, describing the mullahs who presided over Iran as akin to Nazis. The question for many analysts around the world was whether he represented genuine reform or was merely using the language of reform to consolidate power in a country that only used the language of countryhood, I guess I would add to all of that. And it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, if he decides that the country's going to be run differently, well, then that's genuine reform, if we believe that's a country. And in order to do it, he's going to have to consolidate power. So, like I say, a little bit of both. As Kushner grappled with the complexities of Middle East politics, he and MBS began a conversation by telephone and email. They became close very fast, a former American official who sees MBS periodically said. They see the world in the same way. They see themselves as being in the tech-savvy money world. Kushner followed up with a visit to Riyadh, the first of 3 such trips. The two men stayed up until nearly until dawn, discussing the future of their countries. In fact, the future of the country of the United States of America that Kushner has taken over, and the personal holdings of Mr. Saud. As Kushner knew, MBS was involved in a messy battle over succession to the throne. Messy. Which American security officials warned might destabilize the kingdom. And MBS had his own ideas about how to remake the Middle East. But Bannon told me, here comes Bannon. The message that he and Kushner wanted Trump to convey to the region's leaders was that the status quo had to change. And the more places, the better. Trump said to them, we'll support you, but we want action. Action, Bannon said. No one seemed more eager to hear that message than the Deputy Crown Prince. The judgment was that we needed to find a change agent, the former defense official told me. That's where MBS came in. We were going to embrace him as the change agent. When Mohammed bin Salman was growing up in Riyadh, he lived in a walled palace complex the size of a city block, because that's what that country is, right? Sharing a mansion with his 5 brothers and his mother, Fadha, one of his father's 4 wives. Each wife had a mansion of her own, by the way. For most of his childhood, his father, Salman, was the governor of Riyadh and the likely future king. The family's home in the Madher neighborhood had a staff of about 50, including servants, gardeners, maids, cooks, and drivers. Each weekday, the staff ferried the young prince to class at a prestigious academy called the Al Riyadh Schools. On weekends, the servants sometimes escorted him and his classmates into the desert, where they erected large tents and lit bonfires under the stars, because why not? What else are you going to do? His fellow students would gather around him and recite poems of praise, calling him Kareem, the generous one, for sponsoring the lavish parties. The young MBS would smile at the encomiums, especially if they came from a son of one of Riyadh's better families. He likes better families. He treated everyone well, but even then he was aware of everyone's status. I own you all. Mahbub Mohammed, a Pakistani who worked on the staff of one of MBS's cousins, told me. Prince Salman always knew he was special. Still, even for the young Salman, the future was cloudy, due in no small part to the uncertain line of royal succession in the House of Saud. Since 1953, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, one of the world's last surviving absolute monarchies, has been ruled by 6 brothers, all sons of King Abdulaziz Al Saud. Abdulaziz is the central figure in modern Saudi Arabia, having united the kingdom in 1932 after a series of wars. United the kingdom, in other words, by killing all the rivals. That's the way things go. In the 40s, he opened the country to large-scale oil production by Western companies, and after meeting President Franklin Roosevelt on an American destroyer in the Red Sea, struck an alliance with the United States, which has endured ever since. The Saudis guarantee access to oil. The U.S., in return, guarantees Saudi Arabia security from foreign enemies. You get to keep your house. Abdulaziz was a prolific father. He bragged of having married no fewer than 135 virgins. Yay! And he sired at least 42 sons. Wow, and 55 daughters. Since his death in 1953, royal succession has been determined on the principle of agnatic seniority, whereby a king's younger brother is preferred over his sons. You see, that's the difference between, say, there and European monarchies. In 2015, when his successor, King Abdullah, died, his brother, Salman, ascended to the throne. Another younger brother named Mukrin, became crown prince. Mukrin, the son of a Yemeni concubine, was Abdulaziz's last surviving son. So that's what's happened to that line. As the generation of Abdulaziz's sons neared its end, tensions arose over who would be the first member of the next generation to become king. Saudi kings, though absolute in their authority, have traditionally ruled by consensus among the brothers. Their sons, in turn, are placed in key positions across the government. Any one of Abdulaziz's hundreds of grandsons could feel entitled to the throne. So that's the situation that they're facing out there, and that's the situation that Mohammed bin Salman is trying to navigate. And there is, as I said, much, much more, but that sort of sets the place for understanding the Game of Thrones, really, that's going on in Riyadh, and, how the odds could have been viewed as stacked against MBS, but he has cleared the field, and of course, that helps us understand, anyway, not excuse, but understand why he would do something like, arresting huge swaths of the royal family and imprisoning them in the Ritz-Carlton. The answer is, any one of hundreds of the various grandsons of Abdulaziz could have made the same claim to the throne. The first mover, the one who is able to pull off the arrest of all the rest of them, is the one who becomes, quote, king of Saudi Arabia and gets to run the compound any way he sees fit. Will it be for the good or the ill of the United States? I don't know, and he probably doesn't really care.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Anyway, I highly recommend the balance of the article to you for weekend reading. Time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Lots of great stuff on tap, as always. All the esoterica I didn't get to today, all the big stories you already heard about. You can get here's fresh take on that coming up next. Just keep it tuned here.